This wasn't football. This was war. From the narrow alleys of East London to the bloodied terraces of Belgrade, these are 11 football firms that turned match days into battlegrounds, and the brutal stories of how they fell. They didn't care about the scoreboard. They cared about reputation. You didn't wear the wrong colors unless you wanted your night to end in an ambulance. These weren't just fans. These were street armies. Soldiers of the terrace. Some were legends in the pubs. Others were hunted by Interpol. Most are gone now, dissolved, arrested, or swallowed by time. But their names still echo across stadium walls, and in the memories of those who dared to stand against them. This is the story of the 11 most feared football firms in Europe, and how they fell. Chapter 1. The Millwall Bushwackers. They weren't the biggest, they weren't the smartest, but they were the most feared. The Millwall Bushwackers were more than just a football firm. They were chaos in human form. During the 1970s and 80s, Coldblow Lane became one of the most dangerous places in English football. Away fans who dared to step foot near Millwall's ground knew exactly what they were risking: bruises, broken bones, or worse. They didn't just fight in the stands. They took the violence to the streets, the trains, the pubs. Bushwhackers ambushed rival fans, overwhelmed police, and created a reputation so toxic, even the tabloids struggled to keep up. Their chant, "No one likes us, we don't care," wasn't just bravado, it was a warning. The firm's most notorious clashes came against their bitterest rivals, West Ham's ICF. These weren't just fights, they were organized street wars. No rules, no limits, just pure hate. Eventually, Millwall became so infamous that the club was banned from taking away fans to matches for years, and slowly the Bushwhackers lost their grip. Surveillance cameras, police intelligence, and fan bans took the edge off their once untouchable reign. But their name never truly faded. Even today, you mention the Bushwhackers to an old-school West Ham fan, and you'll see the tension in their eyes. Millwall didn't just build a reputation, they built fear. The ICF, inner city firm. They wore suits, not scarves, carried briefcases, not banners. But behind the polished image, the intercity firm was one of the most feared hooligan crews in Britain. The ICF changed the game. While most firms relied on chaos, West Ham's crew brought strategy. They studied train timetables, traveled light, and struck fast, ambushing rivals at stations, service stops, or city streets. They weren't shouting in mobs, they were silent, calculated, and deadly. Their clashes with Millwall, Chelsea, and Tottenham became legendary. But it wasn't just about fists. The ICF built an identity, even branding their name on calling cards left behind after fights. It was organized anarchy. But their fame came with a price. As the ICF's reputation grew, so did the spotlight. Newspapers, documentaries, and undercover police units all started to close in. Members were arrested, raids were launched. The streets got hotter, and the game got riskier. By the early 2000s, the ICF wasn't what it once was. Surveillance cameras, fan IDs, and heavy policing forced the firm underground. Today, it's more myth than movement. But if you know your terrace history, you know exactly what those three letters still mean. The Leeds Service Crew. Leeds United's service crew wasn't just a firm, it was a statement. Loud, fearless, and fiercely loyal, they ruled the northern terraces with brutal efficiency. From the 70s through the early 90s, they were among the most active and unpredictable forces in English football violence. What set them apart was their presence on the road. Away days were their battlefield. Whether it was Manchester, London, or Europe, the service crew arrived early, moved as a unit, and left chaos in their wake. Train stations, city centers, side streets, all became flashpoints when Leeds rolled into town. Their clashes with Manchester United's Red Army and Millwall's Bushwhackers became part of terrace folklore. But it wasn't just the big names they targeted. For the service crew, any opponent was fair game, and they didn't always wait for match day. But like many of England's notorious firms, their downfall came with time. The rise of CCTV, stricter stadium security, and aggressive policing chipped away at their dominance. By the 2000s, arrests, bans, and internal divisions had splintered the once mighty firm. Still, in the minds of many, especially up north, the name service crew carries weight, because for nearly 2 decades they made sure every away day felt like enemy territory. The Chelsea Headhunters. The Chelsea Headhunters weren't just known for violence, they were known for extremism. This firm built a reputation as one of the most dangerous and politically charged crews in English football. Brutal on the terraces, feared in the streets, and infamous far beyond Stamford Bridge. Emerging in the 70s and reaching their peak in the 80s and 90s, the Headhunters weren't just fighting for football pride. They were linked to far-right groups, racism, and organized violence. It wasn't just fists and chants, it was ideology and intimidation. They clashed with anyone, Millwall, West Ham, Spurs, and left a trail of bloodied encounters in their wake. But it wasn't just their enemies that feared them. The Headhunters terrified regular fans too. For many, going to Chelsea away meant taking a real risk. Their notoriety attracted the media, and that's where things started to unravel. Undercover documentaries exposed their inner workings. Footage aired on national TV, showing names, faces, and the raw hatred behind the firm. The Headhunters were no longer in the shadows. Surveillance made their operations nearly impossible, but their legacy remains: dark, violent, and controversial. Few names in football hooliganism sparked reactions quite like the Chelsea Headhunters. The Zulu Warriors. In a scene dominated by white working-class firms, the Zulu Warriors stood out, and they embraced it. Formed in the mid-'80s, Birmingham City's main firm was multiracial, unpredictable, and fiercely proud. While others carried themselves like soldiers, the Zulus moved more like a street gang, loud, sharp, and aggressive. They were known for their energy, their numbers, and their attitude. And once they entered the ground or stormed the streets, everyone knew it. Zulu, Zulu, echoed across stadiums. Not a chant, but a warning. They brought fear, but they also brought chaos. Clashes with Aston Villa, Wolves, and West Ham turned brutal quickly. And unlike many firms, the Zulus didn't shy away from the spotlight. They embraced their identity, even leaned into it. Tracksuits, gold chains, swagger. They weren't trying to fit in with terrace tradition, they were rewriting it. But like every firm that reached the top, the Zulus couldn't stay there forever. One by one, their most visible leaders were taken out of action. Still, the name lives on, in stories, in old footage, and in the history of a firm that proved being different didn't mean being weaker. The Zulus made their mark, and no one who faced them forgot it. The Soul Crew, Cardiff City. Wales doesn't get mentioned often in the English firm scene, but the Soul Crew made sure Cardiff City couldn't be ignored. Formed in the late 1970s, the Soul Crew carved out a reputation as one of the most aggressive and unpredictable firms in the UK. They didn't care about being outnumbered. They thrived on being outsiders, and they fought like they had something to prove. Whether it was in Swansea, Bristol, or way up north, the Soul Crew made their presence known. They were fast, mobile, and brutal. Away days were their specialty: train ambushes, pub takeovers, street chases. The Soul Crew wasn't just looking for fights, they were creating fear. And they earned it. Over the years, they clashed with everyone from Leeds and Millwall to smaller clubs who never saw it coming. But their reputation also made them a target. In the 90s and 2000s, police intelligence units ramped up efforts. Key members were arrested. Cardiff City brought in stadium bans and stricter ticketing. Slowly, the crew's power began to fade. Still, among firm circles, the Soul Crew remains legendary. Not just for how hard they fought, but for how far they took it. They didn't just put Welsh hooliganism on the map. They made sure no one could ever erase it. 7. The Blades Business Crew, Sheffield United. Sheffield United's Blades Business Crew didn't chase headlines, they chased respect. Operating from the early 1980s, they were one of the most disciplined and effective northern firms in the country. Quiet, organized, and efficient, that was their style. While other firms made noise, the BBC made statements through action. Clashes with Leeds United's service crew were fierce and personal. Against Nottingham Forest, Barnsley, and even Millwall, the Blades turned up ready for war. They weren't showmen, they were soldiers. They moved in small units, rarely shouted, and never backed down. Their name, Business Crew, wasn't a joke. It reflected their cold, calculated approach to matchday violence. In the firm world, that made them both respected and feared. But like so many firms, their downfall came with time. Police tactics evolved, travel restrictions tightened. Sheffield United climbed the football ladder and the club began distancing itself from the old terrace culture. Slowly, the core members faded into the background. Still, the Blades Business Crew remain a symbol of no-nonsense northern firm culture. Quiet but deadly. Smart but savage. They didn't need fame, just a reason to fight. 8. The Suicide Squad, Sunderland. The name said it all. The Suicide Squad didn't care about odds, consequences, or limits. Based out of Sunderland, they were one of the hardest and most volatile firms in the Northeast. What they lacked in structure, they made up for in raw aggression. Emerging in the 1980s, the Suicide Squad earned their reputation the only way that mattered: by showing up, kicking off, and never backing down. They weren't interested in tactics or reputation building. they thrived on pure violence. For them, chaos was the goal. Their clashes with Newcastle's Gremlins firm were some of the most brutal in British football. The Tyne-Wear Derby wasn't just a rivalry, it was a declaration of war. And when the squad turned up, things got ugly fast. Street fights, ambushes, and full-on riots became standard. But with that level of violence came a heavy cost. Police began cracking down hard in the 90s and 2000s. High-profile arrests, banning orders, and surveillance operations tore through their numbers. Even the name Suicide Squad began drawing too much heat. In the end, they burned out the way they lived, fast and ferociously. They might not have had the structure of other firms, but for a time, the Suicide Squad was a name that made even seasoned hooligans think twice. 9. Section 5. Burnley. Burnley might be a small town, but its firm, Section 5, had a reputation that punched far above its weight. Named after a part of the Football Offences Act, Section 5 was a tight-knit group that rose to prominence in the 1980s and quickly became one of the most respected crews in the North. They weren't built on numbers, they were built on commitment. Section 5 fought fiercely to defend their turf and took special pride in their away day chaos. From Blackpool to Preston, from Leeds to Manchester, they traveled looking for action and rarely came home disappointed. The Northwest scene was ruthless, and Section 5 fit right in. They brought war to rival towns, ambushed enemy fans, and left their mark at train stations, service stops, and even on local high streets. Despite their size, their name began to carry serious weight, especially among other northern firms. But like the rest, time caught up with them. Police began zeroing in on ringleaders. Burnley FC's rise to the Premier League meant more cameras, tighter controls, and less room for violence. Slowly, the firm lost visibility. Still, in the pubs and backstreets of Lancashire, Section 5's name isn't forgotten. They weren't the biggest, but when it kicked off, they were some of the last lads you wanted to see coming. F-side. The F-side weren't just Ajax ultras, they were Dutch hooligan pioneers. Formed in the mid-70s, they brought a fierce, organized energy to Amsterdam's terraces, and quickly became one of the most feared firms in Europe. What made the F-side stand out wasn't just their violence, but it was their rivalry. Their hatred for Feyenoord's SCF firm reached deadly levels. And in 1997, that rivalry exploded in the infamous Beverwijk riot, where one Ajax fan was beaten to death. It was a turning point, not just for the firm, but for Dutch football. After that, the F-side found themselves in the crosshairs of law enforcement. Stadium bans, national surveillance, and massive media coverage followed. The Dutch government cracked down hard on organized hooliganism, and the F-side's power was blunted. But even with tighter controls, the legacy of the F-side remains. Fierce, loud, and unforgettable, they put Dutch hooliganism on the map. IRRIDUCIBILI, LAZIO, Italy. The IRRIDUCIBILI weren't just ultras, they were extremists. Founded in 1987, they took over Lazio's Curva Nord and built a reputation for violence, control, and far-right ideology. They didn't hide who they were. They wore it on armbands and banners. Their clashes with Roma's ultras during the Derby della Capitale were explosive, both on and off the pitch. Street fights, ambushes, and public displays of hate defined the rivalry. The IRRIDUCIBILI controlled Lazio's ultra scene for over 30 years, ruling it with an iron fist. But power comes at a price. Internal conflicts, political pressure, and arrests began to fracture the group. Then in 2020, Lazio themselves made a historic move. They banned the IRRIDUCIBILI from the stadium entirely. It was a rare example of a club taking down its own monster. Their fall was dramatic, but their rise shaped the identity of Lazio for decades. The IRRIDUCIBILI didn't just support a club, they tried to control it.